The movie opens as we meet a scientist named Dr. Geoff Burton, who has just arrived in Germany from the United States. He then takes a train to the city of Dresden while recalling memories with his ex-wife. The next day, Geoff visits the facility of the Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics. There, he meets the institute's director, Dr. Samuel Mead, who greets him and gives him a tour of the facility. It turns out that Geoff has been recruited to join the research team, so Samuel is very excited to welcome him. During their conversation, we learn that Geoff will continue his work on embryonic genetic research at the Dresden facility. It is also implied that Geoff decided to move here after conflicts over his research funding back in the US because of a personal tragedy. Next, Dr. Samuel takes Geoff to meet another scientist named Rebecca, who turns out to be Geoff's former intern, and the two are excited to see each other after a long time. In the hallway, Geoff bumps into another scientist named Jarek Novak, who is transporting laboratory mice. That night, Geoff speaks with his ex-wife, Sarah, who has already moved on with someone else. He's devastated to learn that she is pregnant, but he pretends to be happy for her, even though it is clear he still loves her. He then recalls the time when their infant son was sick in the hospital, while the couple was distraught. The next day, during a small event, Samuel formally welcomes Geoff to the facility and highlights how his research on embryonic defects earned recognition at a U.S. university. Geoff then gives a speech and presents the work he has been continuing. He explains how his infant son suffered from uncontrolled tumor growth caused by an unknown genetic disorder, which was extremely painful and life-threatening. He named this condition Burton syndrome and has dedicated his research entirely to it ever since the child passed away. Later, while Geoff is having lunch, he's approached by Jarek, who formally introduces himself and seems to be a big fan of Geoff's. He proposes that they collaborate on their research, claiming he has been working in a similar field. He even invites him for a drink that night, but just then, Rebecca calls Geoff, which interrupts their conversation. Later, Geoff and Rebecca walk outside and catch up on their past. Geoff admits he's been following her work all these years and is impressed by her papers. It's also revealed that Rebecca was the one who suggested that Samuel invite Geoff to the facility. Next, Rebecca takes him to her lab and shows him her experiments with axolotl salamanders, which can regrow lost limbs. She calls this ability the Easter gene, a nickname for their power of regeneration. She explains that she has been able to copy some of these regenerative effects into mammal cells, but only in small ways so far. Rebecca suggests they work together to eventually bring these regenerative abilities to other animals, and maybe humans. She then invites him to her place that evening to discuss it more, to which she agrees. In the evening, Geoff buys a bottle of wine before heading to Rebecca's place, but on the way, he's approached by Jarek, who offers to give him a ride. Geoff refuses at first, but when the guy continues to insist, he finally agrees and gets into the car. Jarek asks where he's heading, but Geoff claims he has some work and doesn't talk about Rebecca. On the way, Jarek explains how both of them are the same, as they're willing to take risks and do whatever it takes. He proposes his idea called a viral vector and says instead of mosquitoes spreading pathogens like malaria, Jarek suggests genetically modifying them to carry vaccines or antigenes directly to humans through bites. He suggests using this in Africa and argues that since people are going to be bitten anyway, they might as well catch the malaria vaccine instead. But Geoff finds that very unethical, so he gets out of the car, but before leaving, Jarek asks him to say hi to Rebecca from him. Later, Geoff arrives at Rebecca's place, where he asks her about Jarek and what is wrong with him, but she says she doesn't talk to him much. The two then have a lovely dinner together, and Rebecca asks him to work on her research, to which he also agrees. But the conversation turns tense when the topic of Geoff's late son comes up, and Rebecca finds it brave how he is using his son as the basis of his research. But this only angers Geoff, who claims he hasn't published anything for 4 years, and the university threatened to cut off his funding. The only case that was available was his child's case, which he had no choice but to take. Rebecca understands that, but Geoff becomes very upset and walks away from there. That night, Geoff tries to sleep, but he is constantly haunted by the death of his son. He soon arrives at the facility and tries to leave a note under Rebecca's lab as an apology, but here he notices a researcher sneaking into her lab and stealing something. An alarmed Geoff quickly follows the man and soon ends up at Yarek's secret lab with mice, and it turns out the assistant is his assistant. The assistant worries that Rebecca might find out, but Yarek says she has so many samples that she won't notice a few gone. Here, Geoff is shocked when he realizes that Yarek is conducting his own research using materials stolen from Rebecca's lab. Yarek uses syringes to inject DNA into the mice while Geoff watches from the shadows. Shortly after, Yarek and his assistant leave the lab, so Geoff uses his opportunity to sneak in. He then takes a sample of Rebecca's serum from Yarek's refrigerator and then grabs a genetically modified mouse as well. But Geoff soon gets distracted, and during this, the mouse bites his hand. But Geoff doesn't think much of it and soon exits the lab with the mouse and the sample. While leaving the building, he comes across Yarek and his assistant, who wonder what he's doing so late at night, so Geoff claims he just had some work. Later, Geoff rushes back to his apartment, where he places the serum in the fridge and watches the mouse. This sparks a memory of when his poor son was gravely ill and Sarah was struggling to hold herself together. It turns out, after the boy died, Geoff became completely absorbed in his research, which created a rift between them, and his wife eventually left him. In the present, Geoff observes the mouse and is unable to understand what Yarek has done to the animal. During this, the mouse runs away from his hand, and while trying to chase it, Geoff accidentally cuts the tail with a can, causing the animal to bleed. The next morning, when Geoff arrives at work, he finds Yarek with Samuel, who reveals how the Easter gene discovery belongs to both Rebecca and Yarek, so he asks Geoff to work together with them, as this could be the discovery of their generation. But Geoff is very reluctant, so he privately speaks with Samuel and expresses his concern about Yarek, whom he doesn't trust. But Samuel says that the guy is very competent and asks Geoff to put aside his ego and work together. Later, Geoff goes to speak with Rebecca and begins asking her about Yarek, but she again claims she doesn't talk to him much. He asks if they ever had a romantic relationship, but she denies it. He also recalls what Samuel claimed about how the Easter gene belonged to her and Yarek, but Rebecca clarifies that it was only in the initial stage. They worked on the research together, but she didn't like his style, and he tried to dominate the project, so she eventually threatened to quit, and Samuel allowed her to work alone. Hearing this, Geoff shows her the sample that Yarek had stolen from her lab and claims he used it on a mouse. He says they should complain about this to Samuel, but Rebecca says she will handle it on her own, which surprises Geoff. Later, Geoff goes to smoke outside, during which he again recalls the time when his son was in the hospital. It turns out the child's body was covered in large tumors, and doctors had no idea what was happening to him. In the present, Geoff witnesses a confrontation between Rebecca and Yarek, and he suspects there is something going on between them. Upon returning home, Geoff injects the Easter gene serum into the mouse, hoping it can heal him. Then he's interrupted by the doorbell, and it turns out to be none other than Rebecca. She seems to be drunk, and she invites him to a costume party to blow off some steam. Geoff tries to refuse her, saying he has some work, but when she continues insisting, he eventually agrees. Soon, Rebecca is doing makeup on Geoff, during which he continues to tell her about how Yarek is trying to steal her research and doing something to the mouse, but she claims she can handle it on her own and asks him not to talk about work, as she wants to feel like a normal person for once. Soon, she suddenly feels attracted to him and ends up passionately kissing him. Geoff also kisses her back for a brief moment, but soon pulls away. Rebecca says she's not his intern anymore and they can do whatever they want. Then Geoff shockingly asks her intention of bringing him here and asks if it's just for work or if she wanted something more from him. He claims he thinks she is very attractive, but he doesn't have such feelings towards her, which upsets Rebecca, so she asks him to get dressed so they can leave. In the next scene, we see them at a costume party attended by several of their colleagues. Rebecca begins dancing and having fun, while Geoff is very distracted. He goes to the bar to drink, but soon notices another confrontation between Yarek and Rebecca, and it seems like they're arguing about something. Later, Geoff follows Yarrick to the bathroom, where Yarrick demands his mouse back. Geoff gets angry and threatens to tell Samuel how Yarrick stole Rebecca's research, but Yarrick argues that in the bigger picture, all that matters is the discovery and not who did it. Geoff says he knows Yarrick has been experimenting on the mouse and demands to know how he did it, but Yarrick asks him to wait for his research paper to be published for that, which soon leads to a fight between them. During this, Geoff's head is smashed into a mirror, and he begins bleeding from his head, after which Yarrick finally leaves. Geoff then heads back to the party, where Rebecca notices his wound and asks what happened to him. Later, Rebecca brings Geoff to her place, where she treats his wound and bandages it. Geoff then has a vision of Sarah in a bathtub, which makes him very emotional. It seems like she is pregnant, and Geoff tries to get close to her, but she seems distraught and wants to end her life. Geoff tries to save her from drowning when all of a sudden, white mice pour out of the wound on his forehead. Just then, Geoff wakes up from that nightmare, after which he approaches Rebecca, who is sleeping in another room. He now wakes her up and begins kissing her, so a surprised Rebecca also reciprocates and they end up making love. The next morning, Geoff finds a comprehensive dossier on his previous work and published research in Rebecca's apartment and begins reading it. When Rebecca notices this, she becomes angry at him for going through her stuff without permission. He then brings up how he saw her and Yarrick on multiple occasions, and it felt like something was going on between them. This further angers Rebecca, and she finally admits that she and Yarrick had a little fling a while ago, but nothing beyond that. She also angrily brings up how he called her Sarah last night when they were getting intimate, so he claims he was just delirious. He accuses her of sleeping with a freak like Yarrick, so Rebecca confronts him for abandoning her years ago. In a shocking twist, it is revealed that Geoff and Rebecca had an affair years ago when he was her professor, and he had promised to leave his wife for her but never did. Geoff argues it was long ago and she needs to move on, so Rebecca angrily kicks him out of her apartment. Later, Geoff calls Sarah, but it is picked up by her new husband, which angers Geoff very much, and he demands to talk to his wife. When he arrives at his apartment, he finds the door already open, and it turns out the place has been ransacked. Geoff realizes it was probably Yarrick, but fortunately he still didn't catch the mouse. Geoff soon finds the mouse, with its tail now fully regenerated and its wounds healed, but he notices countless tumors on its body. At this point, he realizes that Yarrick not only altered the mouse's genetics, but that this alteration was virally induced by a viral vector, which Yarrick had mentioned during their previous encounter. Geoff notices that the wound on his forehead has shockingly healed, but now tumors have started appearing on his face as well. Furious, Geoff heads to the facility, where he apologizes to Rebecca and tells her that he needs her help, but she is very distant. When Geoff begs her, she finally agrees to listen, so he takes her to a lab and asks her to do a blood test on him. He claims that he was bitten by a mouse and thinks he's been infected by a virus. Rebecca refuses to believe him since the mice in the lab are pathogen-free, but Geoff begs her to trust him on this matter. Next, Geoff furiously goes to confront Yarrick and immediately attacks him without hesitation. He accuses Yarrick of infecting him, and the two begin fighting, so Rebecca ends up summoning Samuel. He demands to know what's happening, so Geoff explains how Yarrick infected him, while Yarrick says he did it to himself. But Geoff thinks they deliberately lured him into this lab so that the mouse would bite and infect him. At this moment, Yarrick notices that the wound on Geoff's forehead has miraculously healed, so he begins rejoicing as it means the Easter gene works on humans. But Geoff becomes even more paranoid, believing that everyone, including Rebecca and Samuel, has conspired against him to use him as a test subject. Yarrick claims he made the discovery of the regeneration, but Geoff argues that the cure is not the discovery. He says if the healing process has been accelerated, then so has the tumor genesis, and fears he may die soon. When Samuel learns that the virus can be transferred through blood, he becomes paranoid and locks Geoff in the lab. Rebecca tries to help him and screams, but the others end up restraining her. However, Geoff manages to break out of the lab and runs away from there, while Rebecca follows him and asks him to come with her, which he refuses. Here, she shockingly reveals that when she found out about his son, she requested some tissue samples which she used to make the original gene sequence for her Easter gene. She claims she did all that because she still loved him and only wanted to help him in the research. Ironically, Geoff has now contracted the same Burton syndrome which killed his son, and accelerated regeneration and uncontrolled tumor growth are two sides of the same coin. Upon hearing this, Geoff feels betrayed that she hid this from him until now, so he embarks on a chaotic escape in a delirious state. Later, Geoff's condition begins to worsen as he vomits throughout the city and more tumors begin appearing on his body. Then he recalls the time when he was in the hospital with his son, who had tumors all over and was suffering a lot. By the evening, he becomes very weak, so he eventually hides away with a homeless person. Geoff realizes he may die soon, so he calls his wife and apologizes to her, but it goes to voicemail. He then burns his phone and soon ends up cutting his wrists to end the suffering. In the next scene, Geoff wakes up in a hospital bed where he's shocked to find his body back to its normal state, and it turns out he has been healed. Samuel says he is completely healthy now, and his recovery is nothing but a miracle in the medical field. Geoff asks where she is, so Samuel points to Rebecca in the distance, but Geoff clarifies he meant Sarah. Later, Rebecca comes to see him and informs him that the Burton syndrome is apparently caused by an endogenous retrovirus. This is present in all humans, which only mutated slightly in him and his son, thus becoming active. He himself survived the side effects and is now healthy again, as the tumors have healed. However, Rebecca is confused as to why Geoff's son didn't survive the tumors, and this leaves the man devastated. In a shocking twist, we learn that Geoff smothered his own infant with a pillow out of compassion because he couldn't let him suffer and believed there was no cure. The movie ends as Geoff says he doesn't know how his son died,